Welcome back to Yang Daily. I'll be your host, Alex Cheney, bringing you all the Yang news you need to live your life right. Alright, so I did violate my same-day reporting rule, but I swear it's not because I was trying to pack too much in this time. I got into an article on filibusters, a topic I was previously ignorant of, and spent a few good hours digging into the issue, as it is vitally important. And I summarized my thoughts on it for you in this script and in a Twitter thread because all of us need to be informed on this topic if we intend to achieve our political goals. So this episode will be mostly on that, as well as some stimulus and COVID talk. I'll push the smaller items from yesterday into today's episode. Let's get to it. Shout out to our Tier 3 patrons, Peter Park and Shay Meehan, as well as all our other patrons. Your support behind the scenes keeps this service available for all of us. So, Senate Minority Leader Schumer requested a vote on the HEROES Act today, and McConnell once again refused, as he has done with every bill that he personally disapproves of. This is not democracy, this is tyranny. This is why we must flip the Senate and reform the system, including stripping the power of majority leaders to shut down the democratic process. And while McConnell watches people die and the economy burn, the average daily coronavirus cases in the U.S. have hit a record high, stressing local hospitals and forcing restrictions in some parts of the country. Over the past week, the country reported an average of about 69,000 new cases per day, the highest 7-day average yet, according to a CNBC analysis of Johns Hopkins University data. It's up more than 22% compared with a week ago, and some areas are experiencing 80% increases in hospitalizations. This tracks with expectations long expressed by health officials who warned of new outbreaks during the winter months. The worst concentrations are currently in the Dakotas and other northern central states, but 41 states altogether are seeing significant spikes. Deaths lag weeks behind infections, but those have already begun to tick up as well. Former FDA Commissioner Dr. Scott Gottlieb told CNBC, quote, "We are likely to see a very dense epidemic. I think we are right now at the cusp of what is going to be exponential spread in terms of the country," end quote. Testing has increased, but so has the percent of tests coming back positive. So, what is the plan from our leaders in the White House, who are largely responsible for the enduring strength of the virus in America? From Meadows, quote, "We're not going to control the pandemic. We are going to control the fact that we get vaccines, therapeutics, and other mitigations," end quote. In other words, the Trump administration, after pulling our observing doctors out of China, who could have provided vital information about the virus, after denying the virus as a hoax, after pretending it wouldn't affect the U.S., after undermining social distancing and mask wearing, after profiteering off the distribution of PPE and medications, after calling the virus no more dangerous than the flu, despite knowing otherwise, and spreading disinformation about cures, treatments, and the severity of the spread, has now given up all pretense of even attempting to stem the spread of this deadly virus. They will allow COVID to ravage the country, unopposed, against all scientific evidence. For the love of God, vote these mass murderers out of office. Okay, there was also an article today laying out the arc and architects of the GOP's mythical widespread voter fraud propaganda. Check it out in the links if you want the scoop. Now on to the main course. So we've talked about a lot of the failings of our democracy, but we've overlooked one of the most important, the filibuster. Honestly, I had not gotten around to deeply considering it myself yet, but a Vox article by Ezra Klein has changed that completely. It walks through every aspect of consideration around the question of whether we should end the filibuster, and does so very thoughtfully, paying attention to the down system effects of it. Once he got me thinking about it, I found myself repeatedly stopping to consider and coming to conclusions, only to find the author making the very same points in the next paragraph. Since this is actually as much a barrier to getting anything done as is taking back the Senate, I will summarize it for you here. First, let's review. The filibuster is a senatorial act of continuing to speak on the floor, denying any other action, such as voting on or even discussing a bill. It can only be broken by a 60-vote majority, which essentially means you have to have bipartisan support to pass anything. In modern times, it is used routinely by the minority party to deny the passage of any bill they disapprove of, effectively shutting down the legislative branch. This is a problem of similar proportion to that of the majority leader refusing to bring bills to a vote. In the past, it has not been that big of a problem because there was bipartisan support for bills and the filibuster was rarely used. But in today's climate of hyperpartisan politics, it has the power to completely shut down our government's ability to pass laws, and we have seen the results of this legislative quagmire over the last decade. The country's problems grow worse with no corrective action in sight. Whether or not to eliminate the filibuster is ultimately a question of whether or not to allow legislation or suffer a static nation frozen in time. Except it's worse than stagnation, it's actually degradation. As conditions in the world change, it is necessary for laws to change with them. Climate change is a case in point. If we keep on as we are, America and the whole world will suffer catastrophic damage for our paralysis. The Fourth Industrial Revolution is another example, and there are countless more. Imagine if our legislative body had been so paralyzed throughout all of American history. The world will not stop, and neither can we. Another problem is that it becomes unclear what each party and politician stand for when neither can get anything done. We can see already how it has led to parties and candidates saying they will fight for all sorts of things, knowing none of it can happen, and that they can truthfully blame it on the system. If there will be no accounting for failure, what is the disincentive to false promises? If there is no record to judge on, how are we to judge our representatives? The filibuster itself is facilitating the same extreme partisan ideology that scares us into accepting the debilitation it creates. It's a feedback loop that is killing us. But it's not just the effect on our politicians. If policies are never enacted, voters never get a chance to experience the effects of those policies and form firsthand judgments of them. For example, the Affordable Care Act was unpopular when it was passed, but became popular after it was enacted and people experienced it. As a result, Republicans were unsuccessful in repealing it, and coverage for pre-existing conditions is now considered a must. That is how the process is supposed to work. Bush's tax cuts likewise failed to be repealed by Democrats. If we can never see our ideologies in action, we never get the data needed to confirm or deny our beliefs and evolve them. It's like watching two people argue over a fact without ever looking it up. There's no end to it, and nothing to stimulate either side to change their position. In this way, the filibuster breeds partisan, polarizing, extremist, entrenched ideology in both our politicians and our people. Moreover, the paralysis of the legislative branch grates on the collective will of the people for change, doing two things. First, it undermines support for democracy itself, as people see that it is not providing them any real representation. This leads to the rise of authoritarianism that we're seeing, as people are desperate for a system that provides any chance of progress. Second, it gives support to efforts of the other branches of government, which are supposed to be checks on the legislative branch and each other, to instead become proxy legislators. Presidents are encouraged to use loopholes to pass laws through executive orders. The courts are encouraged to legislate from the bench. These are fundamentally unconstitutional in nature and corrosive to the checks and balances system, but also inevitable when the legislative branch becomes a dead limb. If we had a properly functioning democracy otherwise, the Senate would not be voting on party lines all the time. There would be bipartisan cooperation on many issues. But our democracy does not work this way. A vast array of issues, from gerrymandering to the corruption of trustworthy media, have compounded into a disease of partisanship that results in a 60-vote majority being unattainable for almost anything. We know how to fix many of these cancers in the system to get back to a system in which cooperation can occur. H.R. 1, H.R. 4, and other reform bills aimed at doing just that have been sitting on McConnell's desk collecting dust. But none of those fixes can go through without first lifting the paralysis. If lifting the filibuster is followed by enough of these reforms, the partisan legislating from the other side might not be so bad as we fear. And let's not forget that there are still checks and balances on the power of the legislative branch in the judicial and executive. In fact, our democracy has 4 separate vetoes, compared to most democracies having only 1. The filibuster was never intended to be one of them. and having to actually step up and enact their ideologies, putting themselves out there for the people to experience it and vote them out if the people don't like what they see, in itself tends toward moderation. As I see it, the current system is leading further and further into dysfunction and disaster for the entire country, even the world, and the only possibility of reversing it lies in lifting this freeze on the legislative branch. Our country is teetering on the edge of self destruction. We have issues in our economy, democracy, and more that must be addressed if we are to step back from that ledge. Change is vital right now. Yes, lifting the filibuster will lead to changes which will not be universally approved, but that is always the reality of governance. It's a damn sight better than watching the government our founders built tear itself apart while our politicians detach from accountability and our people embrace fascism in desperation for anything that works. The filibuster has got to go. Let's make that clear to our representatives in the next administration willing to pass the reforms that we need. And that'll do it for today's Yang Daily. Bookmark and share the stimulus, COVID, and filibuster threads. Help recruit other organizations to the cause and get everyone to sign the UBI petition. Flood Congress and Trump with calls, tweets, and letters using the ResistBot or Income Movement easy contacts below. If you need help, consult Humanity Forward, the Income Movement Aid Database, the Mission Asset Fund, United Way, or the H3 podcast thread. And don't forget to Yang Daily.